Hello, everyone, and welcome to Director Watch, an AwardsWatch podcast that attempts to get inside the mind of cinema's greatest auteurs, explore what drives them, and maybe we go on a few unrelated tangents along the way. I'm Ryan McQuade, the executive editor here at AwardsWatch, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Jay Ledbetter.
And in honor of Paul Thomas Anderson's debut film, Hard 8, today, we are going to roll the dice and have a guest on who, for the first time ever, knows more than we do on this podcast. So very excited for this episode, very excited to start the series. Ryan, this is a big one. This is, dare I say, maybe the most important director of sort of our generation as far as cinephiles are concerned. He's an important man.
Listen, I'm just going to put my cards on the table and say it's my favorite filmmaker of all time.
Well, this is a dice game, so don't put your cards out.
Well, okay. Well, yes, that's
craps.
True. That's fair.
No California split.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There you go. But I love PTA, and yes, I agree with you, Jay. I think that in terms of all the people that are most likely listening to the show or love movies like us, he's definitely one of a handful that is very, very, very important to shaping our generation and the current generation of film goers and also like critics and minds that you and I read on a week-to-week basis, especially even on our staff and especially of the guests that we're going to be having on. And Jay, do you want to tell everybody out there who our first guest is for this PTA series?
First of all, I want to clear the air. Almost every guest we've had on knows more than we do. So,
correct. That's very true.
However, very rarely has a guest had a level of expertise and done the research that this one has today. And we are excited to be joined today by the author of The Cinema of Paul Thomas Anderson, American Apocrypha, a wonderful book that Ethan, I got to be honest, not finished yet. I'm getting there, almost done. But Ethan Warren is here today to join us. So thank you so much, Ethan.
You're so welcome. Do you want to read a 2-star Goodreads review right off the bat?
Yeah, yes. Let's do it.
Yes, let's do it.
It just got dropped. I am very lucky to have gotten like all positive word on this book.
I'm glad my review finally got posted.
Yeah. The blurbs have been very positive and the reviews have been very kind. But this 2-star review, I'm so excited about. It's first of all, the person's avatar is the sad little heart from Pink Moon, Nick Drake's Pink Moon, which really is a cherry on top of all this. The writing could have been a little more friendly. That's what I really like. I wrote an unfriendly book, apparently. It's the writing could have been more friendly. It is hard to digest properly due to checking over sentences that the reader is forced to do and the mental strain that this puts on a person. I'm so sorry to this person who was experiencing this great mental strain reading my book. I tried to make it readable.
You should have written a fluffier analysis of the cinema of Paul Thomas Anderson.
I know. Well, I will say I wrote a work of academic criticism. It's called American Apocrypha, which is such an annoying name, but it was
that I was going to ask you.
Yeah, we were going to ask about.
Was that your choice or was that? Yeah. So
I named it that. It took me 3 years to come up with a title I liked, and that was the one. And I was just like, people are going to be so pissed at me about this pretentious title.
You can just feel. You can just feel pinkies
pretentious,
up
but
in the air.
Apocrypha does not have like the most endearing. That's not a word that most people relate to something that they really enjoy.
Well,
I would say apocryphal art is not generally smiled upon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I take a somewhat skeptical lens on the guy in the book in certain respects, particularly the way he treats history, which I do think is interesting. I think Apocrypha is very exciting.
Right. It's that ecstatic truth that you talk about in the book.
I love ecstatic truth, the Werner Herzog concept. And yeah, the apocryphal volumes of the Bible, the stuff where like, oh, maybe this didn't really happen, but like, that's kind of exciting, isn't it? I love that stuff. My first title was going to be Never Cursed because my initial pitch for the book was this guy's never made a bad movie.
Man, that would have, yeah.
And
that's a great title.
They came back. They said that title doesn't mean anything, and you can't just pitch a book that says he's never made a bad movie because you can't build a whole book on that. And I was like, but it's true.
It's true, and also it does make sense because it's in one of his greatest movies. So it's like, yeah, you can just tell him fuck off next time.
Well,
that's what I would do.
We say he's never made a bad movie. Ryan, we'll wait until we get to the.
Oh, for God's sakes, we're not doing that tonight.
There will be blood episode.
Maybe the most important film to me, like as far as becoming a person who appreciates movies on sort of an artistic level. That was like the one. We'll get into it as we go.
We'll get into that because
Paul Thomas Anderson is like a super important. The first time I ever wrote about movies, it was called rainingfrogsreviews.com, which
nice.
If you ask any sort of, search engine expert, they would say that's a stupid idea to name something about movies, but I did it anyway. Doesn't exist anymore, to no one's surprise, but that was sort of the inspiration behind my love of film.
And now you're here. I mean, it is always interesting of where we first find Paul Thomas Anderson when you talk about it. I think it's, when you find like the Coens or Fincher or any of his contemporaries as well, or Tarantino for that matter, where our generation finds him. It's not always at this film that we're talking about today. It's Hard Eight, his first directorial feature that we'll review. But Ethan, for you, do you remember the first Paul Thomas Anderson film that you watched? Do you like your experience and what you kind of thought of it? Because my first experience was Magnolia, and I'll talk about that experience in a couple of weeks. But I'm just curious for you, what your first experience was like with him.
Man, I mean, it's a real, like, I walked in the door one person and walked out another person kind of thing, but not in like a super positive way. I'm gonna get to that. Thinking about There Will Be Blood, I just want to shout out my friend Sydney Urbanek, who sent me a picture yesterday of the I think Spanish or perhaps Portuguese or something cover of the tie-in to There Will Be Blood, which was based on the novel Oil, of course, but when in Spanish is called Petroleo.
Oh, I love that.
Again, oil.
You should have maybe another alternative title for your book, Petroleo.
Well, so. And now I'm pulling up all of my other alternative titles. Back Beyond, that would have been a pretty good one.
That would have been good.
Hopelessly Inquisitive Men, that's kind of cute. Anyway, what was my first experience with Paul Thomas Anderson? It was violently negative, in fact.
Really?
Yeah. I saw Punch Drunk Love. I was about 16 years old. And all I wanted was to see this Adam Sandler movie for grownups that I had read about in Entertainment Weekly. Yeah. I was like, isn't this great? Like, because they said all the things that are true about the movie, but also a little misleading, which are like, it takes the stuff that is exciting about an Adam Sandler comedy, but it flips it on its head and it makes it more serious when grown up, which sounded very exciting to me as a 16-year-old. But then when I went and watched this movie, it just was so violently alienating in all of the ways that I now love the stuff, the like extreme contrast between extreme brightness and extreme shadow, the sound design where it sounds like it's typewriters and people banging pots and pans and banging pipes all the time. As I get into in the book, literally the way the movie is put together is counterintuitive and bizarre, the way the shots are arranged and the lengths of the shots next to each other. It's a movie that is built to be very upsetting because it is a movie about a person who is completely upset all the time. And as a 16-year-old, I found that very, very upsetting. And I decided that I hated this director. And he was the most pretentious hack I had ever seen in my life. I wanted to call this guy up and tell him what a piece of crap movie he had made. And that was it for me and Paul Thomas Anderson for a couple of years until There Will Be Blood came out, which was a good 5 years later, I guess. So that's a good half decade of my life that I wasn't watching Boogie Nights and I wasn't watching Magnolia and I wasn't having a good time. But then There Will Be Blood came out and I went and saw it, and within seconds I was just like, oh, it's that thing I had with like Fargo and a handful of movies in my life where it's just like, oh, I'm watching one of my favorite movies for the first time.
Yeah.
Isn't this great?
And you just remember that moment forever. It's like in your brain, and that snapshot is filed away in a folder. So anytime you rewatch it, you're immensely satisfied, but then you're also transported back to when you had that. I have that with every film of his, where I go back to it. And this one, for me, Hard Eight, it was the one that I think it was the last one I ever saw. I savored this movie for a long, long time. I think a lot of people do, because like people often forget that this movie is his first.
It's the forgotten one.
Yeah.
Which is why we had the person who's thought about PTA so much on for it, is for the forgotten one. There you go.
There you go. Yeah. Jay will send you your Venmo later for that. But no, I'm curious about, obviously, your book is fantastic. We could talk about your book all night, more than anything else.
2 stars, unfriendly.
No, it's not. It's great.
I'm really tickled by that.
I do love a friendly book.
Yeah,
I love a friendly book.
All of my kids' books, or the great Corey Everett. He wrote his A is for auteur books for little babies learning about movies. Very friendly.
It should have been more like that. That's actually a thought I had, was that it should have been more like the kids' books.
Yeah. Oh my God!
Shout
out Corey. Those
I'd read
books are
this
so good.
if I had a child. I'd read them your book.
To help them fall asleep at night, certainly.
No. Well, I mean, I fell asleep.
A is for Apocrypha.
And they hear things when you're asleep. Yes, there you go, Jay. And then they remember it. And then I would totally do it, just because I would indoctrinate my kids into the Parent Teacher Association from the beginning. But let's talk about Hard Eight, which is his directorial debut. It stars Philip Baker Hall, John C. Reilly, Gwyneth Paltrow, Samuel L. Jackson. It's about a professional gambler, Sidney, who teaches John the tricks of the trade. John does well until he falls for a cocktail waitress called Clementine. We just mentioned it a couple of seconds ago, but it is the forgotten film, because I think everybody thinks he started with Boogie Nights. And when we talk about Boogie Nights next week, it's kind of rightfully a very much a change in gear, a reintroduction to kind of films that he then goes on to make for a little while. But it is a different speed, this film, and it is his introduction to the world. And Ethan, I'm kind of curious, when you first saw, since you had a bad experience with Punch Drunk Love, so you were putting everything else to the side, but then you saw There Will Be Blood, and it kind of opened you up. So was that the point when you went back and then saw a film like this? And what were your sort of initial reaction, and what's your relationship with this film as a whole, and what do you think of it?
I didn't double back. I'm checking my letterbox to see when I actually first logged this movie, because it would have been since I had Letterboxd, so since 2013 or so. No, it took me a little while to double back and fill in the blind spots, because I loved There Will Be Blood, but then I just kind of I had such a violently negative reaction to Punch Drunk Love that I was like, I can't trust this man. And so I went and I saw The Master finally, and I was like, okay, I can trust this man. And then I went and I filled everything in. I may be getting my gears slightly screwy here, but it wasn't an immediate plunge into the back catalog by any means. And then I held off on Hard Eight even then, because you kind of hear about it and it's like, well, it's the one that doesn't really feel like a PTA movie. It's the one that feels like a Mamet movie. And I don't love Mamet movies in particular. I love PTA movies, and if this one feels more like House of Games than Boogie Nights,
by the way, I watched that movie this afternoon because you wrote about it in your book. And
House of Games?
Yeah.
Great movie.
It's a good movie. It doesn't exactly have the level of performance that you kind of expect in a PTA movie. And also, but also the funny thing is, you watch any of these movies and it's like, okay, so what did he really grab from this? Oh, Ricky Jay's in this. William H. Macy's in this. Jack Wallace is in this. And it's like, you know what? The guy just grabs what he likes. And you got to respect that to a certain extent. Although that is also my biggest hang up with these early PTA movies. But
the cast?
Later. No, the influences. Magnolia and Shortcuts and Magnolia to me is a huge hang up I have. But because Shortcuts is probably one of my 10 favorite movies ever. And I saw it after I saw Magnolia. And so you see Shortcuts and you're like, I like this a lot more than that, even though I love that other thing too. but there's also that great quote you have in your book where somebody confronts him about it, and he's like, "I guess I just ripped it off. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to
Yeah,
tell you. I just ripped it off."
that is almost verbatim the quote. Yeah, it's a perfect little morsel.
Yeah, but that is like just a weird thing about specifically his early movies.
But anyway, what was your reaction to the film when you finally did get to it?
Underwhelmed,
Yeah.
I think, and probably underwhelmed the second time I saw it. I wrote an essay for Bright Wall Dark Room after I had the book picked up.
Mm-hmm.
I basically pitched an essay to Bright Wall Dark Room in order to fall in love with this movie. I was like, what I've got to do is just immerse myself in this thing and write about it for a month, and then it will like get into my bloodstream the way these other movies have. And that really helped. Reading the script helped. Figuring out what he's doing and tying it in with all the other. Sort of my gimmick with the book is creating this thematic web where every movie is tied to every other movie in every possible way. And so locking this one into that web helped. Are we talking about the short films at all? Should we talk about, is it Cigarettes and Coffee or Coffee and Cigarettes? I can't. Yeah, I can never remember.
We can talk about it a little bit. I know, Jay, you watched it recently too.
I did watch. I watched it today. Cigarettes and Coffee. Yeah, it's honestly not as tied to this movie as I thought it was going to be. It is very. I totally see why someone let him make it, because it's very. There's definitely a lot of Mamet in there. There's definitely a lot of Tarantino in there. So riding off of the wave of Reservoir Dogs, you've got people in suits in a diner, and I can totally understand why people are like, "Oh, this guy might have some commercial appeal." Mm-hmm. And I like that short a lot, partly because like the cast rocks. Miguel Ferrer is my guy. Really glad we got to see him. And then Philip Baker Hall, obviously PTA is coming at this from the angle of being a total Altman acolyte, and him loving Philip Baker Hall's performance in oh my god, I totally blanked on what it is. Secret Honor. Yeah. He's fantastic in that film, obviously. And so you put Philip Baker Hall in sort of a showcase performance, although in that film, the little short, it's all about plotting and coincidence and this intricate connection that these characters have, which would be kind of the genesis for something like Magnolia later on. I mean, you see kind of the seeds of all the things that interest him in this short film, which you can only now see. I guess it was like ripped from a VHS or something. It's not the highest quality thing you've ever seen.
It stinks.
But it's really interesting above all else. It's not one of the most masterful works he's ever done or anything, but you totally see kind of what drives him to make movies and then what inspires him. And I think it's really good. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. But it's a good little stepping stone to then get. It's kind of how it usually is, or how it should be, where you make something a little short and it's got maybe a like something inside of it that you can expand, and then you can make a feature, and then from that feature you're then able to build a career. And that's really where sort of the renaissance of like the indie wave of the 90s and sort of folded when you have movies like this, that's just a small character piece for the most part about these four characters, nothing grand or anything. But then his next films are like 3-hour epics and pretty grand. and they're pretty grand, and they've got every.
But Cigarettes and Coffee is the most. It's like the plottiest thing he's ever done, really. I would say.
Yeah, no, for sure. But then, okay, so Ethan, you've a little bit on the film, right? in terms of like multiple times. So, Jay.
Yes.
I've never talked to you about this movie, actually.
No, it's not a very talked about film, to be honest.
Not a very talked about film. We usually just, again, maybe it's a fault of our own. We just also forget about it as well, or we just don't talk about it, or we're like, oh yeah, Hard 8, and you just kind of move on to the next thing. But obviously you had to rewatch it for all this. Yeah. And so what do you think of it?
No, Hard 8 is very much the other one in his filmography. But it is I think it's a good film. I think it's often a very good film. I think it has its flaws, but honestly, I just think you put John C. Reilly, Samuel L. Jackson, and Philip Baker Hall in a movie, I'm gonna have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
They are just tremendous performers, and Paul Thomas Anderson is famous for pulling maybe the best performances out of most of his actors. And then you throw Philip Seymour Hoffman with a mullet on, you got a stew going, baby. We're talking about some cinema here. But it is, I mean, it's so cool to see Paul Thomas Anderson's just attention to character kind of at the forefront of this movie. And it is a movie that is very much set in this world that feels kind of stale, and you feel the cigarette smoke kind of just cemented onto everything in the movie. It's got some of his regular problems. Female characters are occasionally not his strength, and I would say that is the case in this film as well.
He's above average. I think over his filmography, I think he's better than some. He
has some good
better
ones.
than some.
He puts Spike Lee to shame.
I love Spike, but man, Jesus Christ.
But this film, I mean, it does have that mammoth dialogue down to a T, where you have these people who are speaking very specifically, very knowledgeably at times, and just sort of explaining how to do things, like right in front of you, really. They're just saying, here is what you're going to do, while the characters in the movie are doing said thing, kind of in the future, which Steven Soderbergh would kind of go on to perfect over the next decade or so. But it is a film that I find occasionally transfixing. I find its characterization to be Philip Baker Hall's character in this film is really fascinating and so well realized. And his performance in what can often be like, Paul Thomas Anderson is such a director forward filmmaker, where he's so kind of aggressive in his tactics, and Philip Baker Hall in this film is so understated and calm and stoic. And I think that balance works really well in the movie. This is, I think, and Ethan, you mentioned this in your book, actually, because you mentioned that PTA has such a sense of place. And this film, which is so specifically set in Reno as opposed to Vegas, but it never gives you a sense of why, or really establishes a sense of place in the way that all of his other movies do. I mean, he's kind of like the king of the valley. So maybe that's why his movies set in the valley are so much more specific in where they exist. But it's a film that I find to be very satisfying. It feels very much of a time of this kind of post-Reservoir Dogs world, even though it has plenty of differences between those films. But you can see why this movie would get financed after somebody saw Reservoir Dogs. And Tarantino is always going to be compared to PTA because of when they started. But it's a film I enjoy a lot. It's probably his worst movie. I mean, that's just sort of how it is. But I do think it's a good film.
Anybody who doesn't rank it at the bottom when they post their ranked lists on Twitter, it's like, what are you trying to prove?
Yeah. Who are you trying to impress?
You're just trying to be that guy or that girl. Yeah. That's just like trying to be out there.
But if this is your worst movie,
congratulations,
I mean, you're doing great.
Of 9 movies, this is your worst. This is, I mean, some people would kill to have one movie in their filmography.
Yeah.
Be anywhere close to it. I think it's a really it's a solid film. Like I think that's the best way you could.
It's kind of a proof of concept.
Yeah.
I can make a movie.
Yeah. I can take a short to make a movie. I can get really good performances with really good actors. I can work with a legend like Philip Baker Hall. I can sort of establish his relationships with John C. Reilly and Philip Seymour Hoffman. I like Gwyneth Paltrow in this film. Jay, you didn't really mention her, but I actually think she's pretty good in here. Samuel Jackson, this is like a performance. This is very early, is this right before or right after Pulp Fiction?
This is
right before, right? Or right after, I guess?
No, this is after.
This is after. So he's kind of...
This is 97. This is after.
Yeah, so he's like riding the high of, off of that. And
yeah, he's the biggest name in this movie.
At the time, yes, he's like the hottest ticket. It's Samuel Jackson's in this movie. And he's really good. I always think back to this movie as like, well, why isn't Samuel Jackson in other Paul Thomas Anderson movies? Because he actually works really well in this in his universe here.
Well, he's a hard guy to get. He doesn't work very much.
Well, that's true. He, you know, he's playing Mace
He's only
Windu
in 10 or 15 movies
a year.
I believe he was supposed to be Buck Swope in Boogie Nights.
Was he really?
Yeah.
Oh, but that's,
you know what?
I mean,
I think
we worked
that
out.
one worked out.
I think that that was okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But no, I agree with you, Jay. I think that, you know, the best character in this film is obviously what the film was originally almost titled, which was Sidney, and I think Philip Baker Hall. There's just a presence about him from the beginning of this film, from that coffee scene in the coffee shop with John C. Reilly to all the way at the end, and just this sort of precision of this guy who has been through it all, and we've seen. I think I've seen like maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 movies that are kind of like this, set in one place. You know, it's about a guy with a set of skills, and he's got an apprentice, and then, you know, sort of rise up, something bad happens, and then the old guy takes care of the trash, and by the end of it, you're all good. But I don't know. There's just a sense of, I think, of melancholy that's throughout this film too, that I kind of really attach to it as well. And it's not really something that overall he's tapped into mostly throughout his career. I think there are times where there are moments where his characters do have the sense of being down, or you know, the sense of this of you know, honestly, I was thinking when I was watching this film of more of like Alana Haim in Licorice Pizza, and some of her moments there of her of her reflections upon her relationship with Gary. And I was thinking a lot back to just the mood of this movie and how he was able to kind of take that and then kind of plant it in other films, especially one that's like,
I just kept thinking about
later.
the card counter.
But yeah, well, I mean, you could do that. I mean, it's also like, you know, it's kind of hard. He's such a big Altman guy too. I mean, obviously, you know, something that's so chaotic like California Split, and then this is very more subdued. So then you're talking about Mammoth and House of the Game, which is I like that movie. I think it's very good. I think you can get it on Criterion Collection as of right now. But this one is a little lost gem. You don't really talk about it a lot. It is the worst film in his filmography. So sorry, Ethan, then we brought you on for the worst one. But it is, I think it's still,
even just to say worse though, it's just like, it's the least best.
It really, it doesn't do it justice to say that it's his worst, because it's still good.
You know what? We did an exercise on the main show, with the top 5 directorial debuts a couple of weeks ago. And I had this as like an honorable mention. And I think that's where you just kind of have it, just because of the respect of the director and respect for the form.
Down the list,
but it was very down the list of like the honorable mentions. It was like, oh yeah. And, Hard 8, you know what I mean? You know, you just want to kind of throw it in there, but from Citizen Kane to Hard 8, how many movies are in between? That's true. But I think that it's a great introduction to him and the kind of ideas and the complexities of the characters that he would talk about later and make later in his career. I think, you know, just establish, like Jay and you were saying, Ethan, his ability to work with these character actors, these actors that have been established for 20, 30 years, and find something maybe new or interesting for them to do. Because then he does that, I think, you know, especially in like his, you know, like Boogie Nights, and that's working with like Burt Reynolds, or then working with somebody like a chameleon like Daniel Day-Lewis. It's, you know, you're working with these legends already that are established, and then this frenetic guy walks in and with these crazy visions. But it all kind of it all starts here, right? It always starts small, and then it expands. And this is the start of that expansion. I think it's still a really good movie.
Here's the question. What's the better title, Sidney or Hard 8?
Hard 8. Easy. It's such a silly thing for him to be so hung up on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would
think
say
Sidney is more representative of the product, but obviously not as sellable as Hard 8. Yeah, although I don't think Hard 8 is particularly sellable either.
I don't think it didn't make that much money. It's not like if this was
Craps is a complicated game that not very many people know how to play.
It made like $220,000. You know what I mean?
It raked in the dough.
It was like
luckily like, he had already gotten the green light on Boogie Nights before it.
Before the box.
It's so weird that this came out the same year as Boogie Nights. It came out like 6 months before Boogie Nights.
Yeah,
and that's how Boogie Nights can so easily feel like the debut.
Yeah,
because who even had time to see this first?
They're like, oh, did they screen that movie down the street right before the premiere, Boogie Nights in South White? You know what I mean? It's one of those things. But But yeah, no, I would go with Heart Eight just because like Sydney, like who's Sydney then? Well, I guess maybe you could have made it a mystery and been like, who is Sydney?
Well, the thing is, Heart Eight implies to me sort of an almost Ocean's 11 kind of, this is big gambling Vegas energy, and Sydney is kind of representative of what the movie is, which is a movie about this sad older man who regrets his past. So, it's a matter of commercial appeal versus uh, actual representation of what the piece of art is. But I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, well, I think the movie's better when it is just about Sydney or it's just about Philip Baker Hall. I think the movie sort of loses its steam or isn't able to elevate itself when it starts focusing on this side plot with John C. Reilly and Gwyneth Paltrow and this deal gone bad in a hotel room and having to get rid of this body. And it's like when you start getting into, like you're mentioning, Jay, the Reservoir Dogs or sort of the pulpier elements the genre.
This is the closest thing to a genre movie he's ever made.
It's like that's not you, right? I don't know, Ethan. Do you see that as well in terms of like with this movie, where like it feels like it does feel a little bit like two movies kind of trying to be forced into one, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I just found myself thinking: have you read Knuckle Sandwich, the screenplay he wrote in his 20s?
No.
No,
well, I didn't write the book, but you did all the research. So, what was that about?
It's floating around out there. Just in terms of like his relationship to genre, it's very funny because it's kind of like PTA's John Wick a little bit, where it's about this. So it's about Barry and Lena, the two main characters in it, Barry and Lena, just like in Punch Drunk Love. But in this version, it's the 60s and it's the crime underworld and like jazz clubs of LA.
Oh, come on.
And Lena breaks up with Barry, and to get her back, he cuts a swath of violence through LA, just committing these horrible assaults on every goon he runs across, sobbing all the while, having this complete emotional breakdown. It's this fascinating concept, and it comes to this huge, like soaring, violent denouement. It's a really interesting piece of work. I think he was interested in genre play at the beginning, and then very quickly moved away from that. I mean, Inherent Vice is definitely obviously riffing on the noir, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure some people would want to call There Will Be Blood a Western. You'd probably just be trying to make a point if you did that.
Just comparing it to No Country for Old Men. But Jazz Club in LA, it sounds like Damien Chazelle will tackle that soon.
Jesus Christ. Well, no, he has been talking about potentially jazz movies and going back into that.
The Denzel Washington movie.
Yeah, which I mean, Denzel Washington with Paul Thomas Anderson, but then also there's been the rumors of him like making a movie with Leo and Joaquin Phoenix too, which is either one of those titles, or both. Just sign me the fuck up for him. Either way. But
I just want to get him in a room with Colin Farrell. That's my biggest dream on earth, is to get those two guys working together.
That's my guy.
Colin Farrell. Oh my God. Yeah, the
possibilities are endless.
I'm thinking about it right now. I should be thinking about Heart 8 and talking about this movie, but
we did recently on another episode, we did hypothetical castings for Oppenheimer if it was made like 10 years ago, and I said Terrence Malick starring Colin Farrell, and I thought it was just one of the greatest ideas I'd ever come
That was pretty good. That was pretty man.
Terrence Malick's Oppenheimer? Huh?
10 years ago specifically. So the Terrence Malick of like Knight of Cups era and to the Wonder era.
I think it was, or were you thinking more like the New World 20 years
maybe
ago?
It was 2000. I don't remember when it was, but my thinking was kind of, well, still, I love new Malick too. So
so do I. To the Wonder.
Yeah.
Maybe one of my favorite Malicks, which is like such an obnoxious thing to say, but I love that movie.
Not a lot of people will say that. Yeah, because a lot of people don't like that movie, but no.
I got a Malick poster right over here.
I see. Yeah,
he's the best.
You and your
he's probably my favorite.
But no, what were we even talking about?
Hard Eight.
Hard Eight. That's right. A movie that we're here to talk about. It is interesting about him going into genre too, because he he is a fan of genre. I love anytime Paul Thomas Anderson just talks about like we always hear him be like, I'm the TCM guy, right? He's got it on in his house, and
But
it's
also,
playing
he loves Happy
nonstop.
Gilmore.
He loves Happy Gilmore, or
And
was it
Venom
the
too?
yeah, I was gonna say Venom 2, or like he's talked about T2 in the past, right around this era as well. Yeah,
He walked out of film school because the professor badmouthed T2.
yeah, exactly. And he was just like, no, how can you badmouth Big Jim? And so
Yeah.
it's because Big Jim rules.
And because and what he turned in a paper, right, where it's like, here's a page of Mammoth that I'm saying I wrote, and he got a C+ or something. Which
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, not everybody has to like Mammoth, Paul. But
It was Hoffa. It's not one of like the big ones.
But no, I always find it fascinating that like usually our biggest auteurs are then also like their film tastes. That it's always different. Like his conversations, because now he's a dad, and so he's like, yeah, I watch all the Marvel movies. I don't give a shit about them. Like
but also I like it when people are kind of combative about it. He's so like, yeah, we just get to keep making movies. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I like Brian De Palma being like, this guy's a hack and he cheated on his wife. Get out of here.
Yeah,
I
PG is
like that.
his aggressive like poptimism. It gets a little bit like, Paul, are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
you
right.
can dislike something. In the past few years, it's just gotten so like, never say. There's that anecdote about him taking John Krasinski's side.
Yeah,
Like, you never say a bad word about a movie, because if any movie fails, we don't get to make movies anymore.
And it's just like, I just want a hamburger at this barbecue, Paul. Calm down.
I know.
Like it's
Well,
not.
it's really like,
it's not
Paul,
the quiet guy.
You're one of like
it's
10
like,
people that get to make movies
Yeah,
at
he
your
gets to
budget
make
level however you want, right?
Yeah,
like, not everybody gets to do
he's
this.
gonna find the money. Paul's always gonna find the money. Krasinski's like, I got to make like a Quiet Place movies until the end of time, because that's just how I have to roll.
Well, I'll say this. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I don't think John Krasinski is quite the artist that Paul Thomas Anderson is.
I don't know about that, Jay.
I don't
That's a pretty bold
He did
statement.
a pretty good job
making.
of smirking at the camera in The Office, though. I'll give him that.
One of them adapted Pynchon, one of them adapted David Foster Wallace. So, they're in the running.
There you go.
Good point.
Yeah, very good. So this movie, Heartache, because I feel like we're just dancing around the movie, and and we just kind of said
At the end of the day, you can talk about Heartache pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think we have.
It's like there is not that much to delve into. There's a lot I think is interesting in what is cut out of it. Have you read the screenplay?
No, I have not read negative on it. Okay.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff cut out of it that I think reveals a lot.
There's a couple of insane final scenes that were cut out, one of which would have been disastrous.
Well, which are you thinking of?
I haven't written down. What are there's the one where the guy goes and searches them out. The guy who they kidnapped would go and seek revenge. That's feels
the original
totally
ending.
You talk about ecstatic truth. That is like totally from a different world than this movie is.
Well, I think he wanted to punish Sydney. The original ending is the guy that John and Clementine assaulted kills Sydney and then heads off in search of John and Clementine.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, John and Clementine are in Niagara Falls, and a bellhop kind of winks at Clementine or something, and John assaults him. And so there's all this sort of dread that's accumulating. And like, what I love about this movie is that like Sydney is stuck and he has to live with more sins, but there's this sense that John and Clementine maybe might break the cycle. Maybe it's not fully clear. And it's not, but what you're left
gives
with
them a chance.
You're left with the fact that they want to. Yeah. And that's all we've got to go on. And so I've got to say that's more or less a happy ending.
It's fair.
It doesn't have the aggressive dread that this original draft does. The original draft has flashbacks to revealing like, I think Sydney is like in John's father's house, and baby John is like crying in the mother's arms, and like they're all in the mix. We have him Sydney calling his children, or calling his ex-wife and begging to talk to his children. Just a lot of stuff that like is just making things explicit that don't need to be.
Probably just
melodrama.
just drawing it out. If anything, it's anything. It's like it's a good thing that he from early on was like, let me sort of just take it back a little bit and just kind of, because the first time director just want
it
to
makes
throw
the
it in.
implied explicit.
Yes,
is what it
exactly.
does.
Well, and it's not an instinct he would stick with very often for the next couple of movies because Boogie Nights and Magnolia, almost nothing's cut out.
No.
Well, there's a couple of entire subplots cut out of Magnolia, but that's a whole other thing you can get into on that episode.
He cut that movie down so lean though.
Yeah, I mean it's a lean, mean 6 hour. No, I'm just kidding.
But he gets better and better at choosing what to pull out of his movies.
Yeah.
And in Hard Eight, he does a pretty decent job at pulling stuff out. And in Phantom Thread, one of my favorite things about Phantom Thread is reading the screenplay and seeing the little things that he plucked out and are just left as implication. Like Reynolds Woodcock being a combat veteran of World War II, which is like you would have to like really squint to make it out in the movie. But it's there. In the script, he made it explicit, and then he just took out that, and you just have to think about it for a minute.
Yeah, it's just also it's leaving the audience in a lot of ways. Just it's not having to hold their hand so much, and to know that from your first feature is actually, I think, really smart. But then also, like you said, Ethan, he can't help himself afterwards. He's just like, I'm gonna like open up Pandora's box essentially, like a couple months later with Boogie Nights. And I mean, from the get-go in that movie, you're just like, well, we're on a whole different playing field at that point. Because this movie, because I think when most of us, we have this perception of him, this high energy in this era, just high energy, manic, everything. And this movie is just a kind of methodical, simple pace. It's nothing crazy. We're not going to go over the board here, and we're just going to tell the story of these people. That's it. We're not going to extend far out from this little circle of people. And that might be jarring. And I think it's jarring either way, because for people that are completists or start, like if they've never seen a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and it's the what Tarantino says, if you start on the shelf and you go all the way down the filmography, if you still start with this, it's like, oh, that's an interesting like debut. But then it's also it's kind of, I always find it interesting. It's like, because I watched these all back to back in preparation for this, and the way this ends, and it just ends on such a note. It's just like, oh, yeah. And then Boogie Nights, bam, you're right in it. It's like, wow, this is completely different. It's like going from, losing a high to then going right back on cocaine, and, but I also, I feel for Sydney a lot throughout this movie. And that's just
but it's just such an understated movie compared to
no, it is. And
it's most interesting to talk about in relation to his other movies.
It is. It is because, again, Philip Baker Hall has sort of this resurgence towards the later part of his career, and it's a lot to do with, somebody like Altman earlier, like 10 years, 15 years earlier. But then really it's, him working on these three films with Anderson here and really getting to showcase in the sort of twilight of his career, just how special of an actor he was. A character actor he was. I mean, I think he's
Zodiac. Good grief.
He's so good in that movie. What is he in that movie? He's like he's
the handwriting expert.
He's a handwriting expert. And he's just in it for like 3 scenes, but it's like, you could tell at that point it's like, oh, okay, he's back and I can do like 3 scenes in a movie or 2 scenes. Like, we'll talk about it next week, but his scene in Boogie Nights is out of its mind. It's probably one of the best scenes that Paul Thomas Anderson's ever done. And he just walks in and you're like, oh, it's Sydney. Sydney's here, folks. But what do we think of like Gwyneth Paltrow in this movie? Jay, you had a problem with, I guess, the female character.
It's less to do with her as a performer than
it's more than what it's on the page.
It was just a totally, she is reactive in every way in this movie, which is something that he can fall prey to at times. Although I think he has also created, even in Boogie Nights, some really great female characters. But in this film, I don't think it's an egregiously underwritten character or anything, but At the end of the day, really, because you could argue John is like not the most textured character ever written. This is a movie about Sydney. Sydney is in 95% of the scenes in this movie. And because of that's kind of at the expense of the other characters in the film. And Gwyneth Paltrow, I think, does a good job with what she's given. And I think the film works because of everything involving Sydney, and everything else is secondary. So it's not like a huge ding on the movie, but it's also fair to say that Gwyneth Paltrow's character, who was not a star at the time, this was what, shortly after Seven, I guess. So she was still on her way up, a couple years before Emma, in Great Expectations. So
yeah, and before her,
it's only interesting in retrospect to say, oh well, they totally wasted Gwyneth Paltrow. Well, Gwyneth Paltrow wasn't Gwyneth Paltrow yet.
No.
So you got to put it in context.
Yeah, but I think also too, I think she does work really well off of Baker Hall, but I think I think her believability, especially in those moments where obviously it's like the tension rises up, right? When they have the body and everything. I think she's really good in those scenes. And
her best moment in the film to me is when she's on the bed, assuming that Sydney is going to proposition her. And
I was just about to bring that up. Yeah.
Stylistically, you see these kind of alluring shots of her body, and then the really great composition of where you can see her head sitting on the bed in the screen, but all you can see is basically Philip Baker Hall's crotch. And
one of Anderson's favorite shots. It's in every one of his movies. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Taken from The Hustler, I think. George C. Scott, a trick that George C. Scott's character pulls to dominate a character. The threat of the male waist, I think Anderson called it.
It's effective in this movie, and it kind of takes on a different context in every different way that he does it. Because here you have Clementine, who is in this situation where she is not only operating under the assumption that that's what he's going to do, but completely resigned to it and almost okay with it. She's just like, oh, well, this is how the transactionary world of Reno works. And this is what I have to do to get a good night's sleep, which is very sad and disturbing. And then when you put it in the context of kind of Sydney's existence, where his whole thing is he is trying to reinforce his usefulness by being a fatherly figure to the surrogate family, which is also one of Paul Thomas Anderson's kind of pet themes that he has in all of his films. It takes on even this other level of thematic potency. So that sequence, I think, is one of the premier parts of the movie.
We got to pause for a second on what you just said. He needs to, what'd you say, reinforce his usefulness?
That is what I said, yes.
Yeah. It's I mean, I think one of the great mysteries of this movie is why does he do what he does? Why does he set John and Clementine up? And I have read a lot of different opinions, and I am curious about yours. Say more about that.
Well, I mean, so over time, it sort of gets unraveled what is driving him in this film, right? And we hear about his relationship to his children, and then when we hear about his guilt of killing this young man's father, well, essentially what has happened to him? For all intents and purposes, their father has been killed as well. He has been stripped away from their lives. And you have that crazy line where he says, I love you like you're my own son. And then you just kind of think about the realities of what that means is, I love you with an asterisk where I will abandon you if necessary. And so when he is in this situation where he is so, his life now calls for him to be cold because he has been detached from the ones that he loves. And so when he sees people that are in need and he sees an avenue to provide help for them in a way that is not totally cumbersome, like it's easy to give someone a bed or give them a little bit of money to go get a meal, as a way of making amends for all the evil that he feels that he has done. That seems to be the thing that gives him the most, that makes him feel the best at this point in his life, is just trying to imbue some sort of fatherly satisfaction onto someone who needs it. And it comes mostly from a place of insecurity more than anything else.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Jade is not. I don't need to speak.
So that's
Jade knocked it
my
out of
hard
the
eight
head.
thesis.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Well, I mean, I've read some stuff that I really find very out there about what he's going for, like that he procures Clementine for John as like a gift to the son,
Yeah,
which I just really don't read it that way at
that sounds
all.
like a stretch to me.
No,
Yeah.
that's not how I read it at all. I mean, they have sort of their own connection, and I mean, Jay, you're knocking it right out of the park, I think, for it, because I mean, when everything hits the fan, he has to kind of turn it back on, and it's regretfully having to do this. And I think especially a lot of the stuff with Jimmy, it's still, even though he's protecting himself from the truth coming out, he's still also protecting John and Clementine from everything that is from what has gone on with them to just anything that has to do with him. He's this quiet force, and I love the way in which the shots are set up with Jimmy in the car, and Sydney in the car, but then also everything in Jimmy's apartment, and just how and back also in the hotel room with the shot that I have here, as my background tonight. I just think of the way he shoots it all, the tension in those moments. PTA is able to really heighten them because it's all centered around this guy's grief and guilt
Yeah,
that
he's got some
had.
demi close-ups to
Yes,
accomplish that as well in this one.
absolutely, and he's on record of being obsessed with Jonathan Demme's close-ups, and one of my favorite conversations ever was when he did a DGA conversation with Barry Jenkins for Bill Street Could Talk, and he was talking. They were talking a lot about Demme together, on that, and I he's always had those, but I think in this movie you see the sadness, and you see how tired Philip Baker Hall is in a lot of those shots too, of just like, I don't want to do this, I'm tired of doing this, I'm trying to get away from doing this. I burned a bridge from my past and my family, and now I'm doing this again. And I think that final shot with him just putting, fixing his cuff and realizing that, like, this is just a cycle that is just going to continue, and I'm just drawn almost to it.
It's a stain on him that he's going to have to cover.
Exactly. And it's sad. And if he sees John again, or if he sees, or whatever happens with Clementine, it's all, it's all really doesn't matter at the end, because he's going to probably attach himself to somebody else, and his past will catch up, and he's just kind of going down and down and down. Now, the film, I don't think then has him fully 100%. And maybe he's just not the filmmaker there at the time yet to go and, like, say, for him to reflect on it 100% and see how that will look in a future state. But I think where it leaves Sydney is in just this really, he's been here before, and he's tired of being there, and it's a moment of exhaustion. And I think that it's a beautiful wrap up from the beginning of the film, where you're at the diner, to then when you're at the end of it, and how this just kind of goes full circle just in just one place. And how you talk about location, this is not glamorous like Vegas. It's it's a dirty town. I don't know if you guys have ever been. It's not. It's very it's very workman, and he's a workman.
You go to Reno to gamble, and it is not the glamorous gambling that it exists in other places.
Not that, like, Vegas is that glamorous either.
Although I will say the final shot. The final shot of this film, to me, is very much first-time filmmaker. Let me put a little point on this movie, which is something that I don't think he really does in his other movies. But the thing I do want to talk about, and this goes far beyond the scope of Hard Eight, because again, this is the one that this is a little bit of the forgotten one. I want to ask Ethan, because Ethan, you have a whole section of your book about the influences of that Paul Thomas Anderson uses on his films. And I mentioned, like, the first three films, really, which are kind of the dividers of, here's kind of the first era of Paul Thomas Anderson. First of all, are you a fan of the films of Robert Altman?
I am a fan of many of the films of Robert Altman. I have not seen all of them because there are quite a few, but he made some of my favorite
Yes.
movies, certainly.
And so when you look at how much do you hold his Paul Thomas Anderson wearing his influences on his sleeve against him in some of these early films? Because I don't. There are times where it irks me, and then there are times where I'm like, yeah, I mean, if you're gonna make a movie, you might as well be inspired by some of the greatest movies of all time.
Well, I just think it is not a rich avenue of discussion in the first couple of movies in the way that it is later. It is much more exciting to talk about where do you see classic MGM musicals in Punch Drunk Love than it is
Sure.
to say, where do you see whatever in Boogie Nights? Where do you see Goodfellas in Boogie Nights? It's like, well, you see it right there. And there's just not that much to analyze. It doesn't bother me because I think he is, there's a couple of things. He's a little bit of a collage artist, and the collage is a noble art form in
Mhm.
these first couple of movies. He would disagree, I think, with. I mean, his whole thing was never like, I'm not inspired by Scorsese and Altman. His whole thing was like, yeah, but I'm also inspired by guys way further back than
Yeah.
that. So how about don't be lazy and just don't compare me to the guys of the last 20 years, compare me to the guys of the last 50 years. Um, I don't know if you didn't have those inspirations, we wouldn't have the opening shot of Boogie Nights, and I sure like that shot.
It's a hell of a shot. I mean,
Yeah,
every artist is. I mean, every artist is stealing a little bit from everyone. I mean, yes.
Well, he uses that quote about like, oh, well, there's nothing left but Beatles songs, right? It's all Beatles songs.
every song is a Beatles song. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just how you make it your own, because
right.
Tarantino's the same way. People will say, "Oh,
Oh, sure.
Well, that's
he's
very
ripping
interesting
on."
because he is the same, but he even is more overt
Oh
with it.
no, I know, I get it,
But the thing that he does is he does it with more obscure stuff,
yes,
and
but
so
people,
people
but
aren't
people,
able to call them out as explicitly as they
I
are.
think people don't complain nearly as much about it with Tarantino as they maybe do with some of these early PTA films because he's just leaned all the way into it. You know what I mean? He wears those influences on his sleeve, and then he just is like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna just do it all throughout his entire filmography." And I'm not saying that PTA doesn't do it throughout his entire filmography. I think he does it less and less as he goes on. But and I mean, there's definitely like influences of films, but like there's not like specific shots like you're talking about, Ethan, like shots out of Goodfellas or things of that
Well,
nature. I mean, there probably
look at
are, but
Phantom Thread. Phantom
no,
Thread is a little bit of a Hitchcock party.
yes, no, it really is, but but the structure and story of that is very personal and unique, and it's
But I
different
will
than
say
that.
you can watch Phantom Thread on a surface level and not really come to that conclusion, I think. Whereas you can't watch Boogie Nights and not be like, oh, Scorsese, Nashville, like that's what's going on.
But you know what? But for me, you probably look at Scorsese and Altman's filmography, and you can trace back dozens of international or contemporary directors that inspired them and making certain decisions and how they were all working together, or inspired by each other in the 70s, and in the 60s as well. It's like, it's, it's always going to happen. It's always, I mean, literally he's inspired by Demi for close-ups, right? Demi's a contemporary.
Yeah, sure.
And then therefore you look at like something like Barry Jenkins, who's literally like taking those close-ups and
Yeah,
making
that's
them their own
one
and throwing.
shot. I mean, I get that, but
No,
but
he's
like I
got
watch,
dozens of shots
I
like
watch,
that.
well, I watch The Master, for example, and to
Yeah.
me, The
Good idea.
Master.
I love to do that.
Yeah, me too.
I
Just
saw
on
it
like
just
on a
a month
Saturday.
ago on 70. It was wonderful. And I watched The Master, and that to me is the turning point of PTA, where I think he becomes PTA a unique entity. That to me is where that occurs. And it's entirely possible that that's because I don't necessarily have the cinematic experience or vocabulary to speak to the potentially overt influences that movie wears on its sleeve. But that to me feels like nothing that I've really seen before. Whereas I feel like, to a lesser extent as it goes on, Boogie Nights is like very derivative is probably too harsh a term, but let's call it derivative. Magnolia, to me, again, Shortcut's one of my favorite movies of all time. I just can't help it. I can't help it. It just seeps in every time I watch it. And then Punch Drunk Love to a certain extent, and There Will Be Blood to a lesser extent, but certainly I still feel a lot of the Altman influences on that one, as well as kind of his first foray into the kind of Kubrickian territory. So it's just, I guess it's just a matter of how much do you ding a movie for being that way, and how much is it just innate in the process of making art, I guess, especially at this point when we've had 120 years of movies. It's just an interesting thing that to think about and consider. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we'd lose a lot of my favorite movies if we were dinging people too much for that. I think we wouldn't have The Young Girls of Roquefort. I've never had to say that out loud. And that would bum me out a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all grow up with certain directors, and I think that when we're young, we don't see them. We don't see the influences, or we don't care about them because we're finding them.
I saw every Paul Thomas Anderson movie and loved them, and then I saw
exactly. I mean, like, perfect example of this is something like a younger generation will see something like Soul, and not see all the A Matter of Life and Death images that are throughout that entire film. But if you see A Matter of Life and Death, like we did, Jay, that year,
you don't think the 7 and 8 year olds have dove into Powell and Pressburger yet?
It's probably more 9 to 10 year olds, to be fair. That's when they start, they really get into that, into the Archers. But I think that's when, as we grow older, so do they. And so, of course, they're going to, I think our favorite directors, they try to, at least for the most part, lean away from their influences and try to, they evolve more as filmmakers. But that doesn't mean that you can't use if I see a movie like Magnolia, and then it introduces me to the world of Robert Altman, because then Robert Altman's going to introduce me into the world of whatever influenced him. And that's the secret gateway drug of cinema, is that everyone wears their influences on their sleeve and they're passing down this history. That's why I think PTA.
But then the question is, does it dilute what?
I don't think so. I don't think so. No. I think that every film is a history lesson, one way or another, good or bad, because every director has
Resident Evil Rise of the Lycans.
Maybe not every film, but I'm just saying is that from his filmography, it seems like he,
or was that that was an Underworld film,
or maybe that was an Underworld film. I'm sorry. Well, we'll do that series down the road, and we'll get that on the books. But you guys know what I'm saying? Like it just, they all are inspired by these guys or girls doing these films, making movies, because they were once like us, trying to grab whatever they can to fill the itch, and hopefully one day be able to make something or talk about something or find people that were, it's video store days, you know what I mean? And be able to go through the rack and be able to find just a shot or a piece of dialogue or something that was influential. And I mean, Scorsese's the same damn way. Like, Scorsese just got on Letterboxd, and what does he do? He puts up an entire list.
Letterboxd for him, to be clear.
And they but I guarantee you, his daughter hasn't seen half those damn movies that have influenced all of his films throughout the space and time. And half of those movies, probably nobody even knows what those are. But it gives a chance for people now to go and be like, I'm gonna
every single one of them. I watched them all.
There you go, Ethan.
But I'll say this is where the apocryphal nature of PTA comes into play, right? Because he's filtering this quote unquote history through the lens of his cinematic experiences.
How we brought it back to the book.
So,
that's just
I mean, I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm gonna say there's some good stuff in that book, despite my 2-star review. I think there's stuff there. It's not friendly per se, but there's a lot of great things in there.
I'm gonna put really a lot of winky emojis in the next book.
Oh
yes, exactly. Yeah, you should write it in all strictly emojis.
I think that would be insufferable. That would be the most insufferable book on the planet.
It would be so friendly. I feel like I get this concept that, like, if you take a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, something's going to get diluted eventually. The image is going to be a little bit less vibrant. But I also think there's something I'm sitting here trying to think of, like, what is the movie that I can think of that like invented a new language, and that's a pretty tall order. And certainly it's a gray area between copying the Copacabana shot and inventing a new mode of cinema.
Speed Racer.
Speed Racer. I mean, we're all going to the World's Fair came to mind.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's the last movie I saw where I was like, well, that feels completely new. Yeah, I mean, I don't ding him for it, but I do think it's more exciting when you get down to Inherent Vice and the influences are like comic books and slapstick,
stoner comedies. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just not they're not like, it's not Goodfellas being your influence or Altman. It's things off the beaten path.
Let me just butt in and say that Inherent Vice has plenty of Altman influence.
I'm sure it does. Yeah.
I mean, that is the debatable point. I see less of it there than some people do.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, if you're going to rip off anybody, rip off one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, I guess.
Well, he does. Well, it's interesting because he has such different.
I mean, also too, that's one of his mentors. That's somebody that he reveres.
Buddy.
Yeah,
but
it's his
he
buddy.
He has different sensibilities than Altman, especially as time goes on. He's a much more calculating, less chaotic, tactician
exactly
than Altman ever was. Like no one will ever go to a Paul Thomas Anderson movie and be like, oh, I feel like that's completely different than the screenplay, which is what almost every Robert Altman movie was.
Yeah, to be fair.
And Ethan's shaking his head over there. He's disagreeing with me.
No, not necessarily. It's a rueful shaking of my head, and it's a complicated relationship. Anderson wrote the introduction to Altman on Altman, and he talks about how what he admired in Altman was the way he would not be too precious, and he would be rough and spit shine it. I've never forgotten that term, because Anderson is not rough and spit shiny. That is not his impulse. And so how much are you really drawing from Altman? Like, you've got your big casts, but if that was what was so impressive to you about him, where is that in yours? And there's a lot of interesting writing out there about the relationship between Altman and Anderson, that it's maybe more in the sense of, my God, I think there's some article that uses the term like anxious teaming of the emotionality of it. Even if characters are not always, I mean, Anderson's scripts are so much more scripted, as you alluded to, than Altman's. You're not going to have the characters cross talking and drifting in and out of audibility that way.
Yeah, my favorite thing about Altman. Ooh,
of this. The screenwriter winning an Oscar for MASH and then being like, I reject this Oscar. I did not write that movie that you saw on the screen.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I lost my point. I got in the weeds a little bit. So hard reset. Next point.
No, that's what you're supposed to do on the show. You're supposed to get into the weeds. You're supposed to get down and dirty with this. Does either one of you have anything else you want to say, though, about Hard Eight, about this era PTA, right before we're about to get into Boogie Nights? Anything else? I mean, Ethan, you wrote the whole book on it. If you want to just read excerpts out of your book, you can totally do that.
Last thing I want to do ever again. I mean, it's probably worth talking a little bit about the behind the scenes kerfuffle surrounding it all. Where this is a movie that really influences the next two in that he becomes incredibly paranoid and defensive after this.
Yes.
Where, to make a long and complicated story incredibly short, which I suppose we should, he had the movie essentially was taken away from him and recut into a form that he didn't recognize, and he had to beg to be have the assets returned to him, created his own cut at his own expense, which he then went and jammed through and sent to Cannes and managed to canonize as
used
the official cut,
definitive cut.
Yeah. So it's very canny and very sort of aggressive of him, but
canny.
Oh, for God's sakes!
For God's sakes!
For God's sakes! Let the man talk.
if you see Boogie Nights and Magnolia as these movies of excess and these movies of uncompromised vision, a lot of that is because he demanded nobody will make me compromise my vision or I will not sign the contracts. And good old Mike DeLuca over at New Line said, sure, go for it. And man, Mike DeLuca has had a long and storied career, but he has made some excellent decisions, and patronizing PTA is one of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild manic behavior, but it's also the kind of wild manic gamble that you've got to take when you are the one that's got it all. Yes, gamble. All right. It's a roll of the dice. It's the game of chance. Certainly that you have to do, and it's the confidence. And I mean, by doing that, and we'll talk about this the next 2 weeks, those two movies break him to the point in which then he does a complete course correction when he does Punch Drunk Love, of then restraining it back in and saying, I'm not making 3 hour, and then had to put personal rules on it.
5.5 hour podcast on Magnolia. Get ready.
Yes, but no, and then that's when Punch Drunk Love happens, and that's why, Ethan's experience was like that when he first saw it, because it was not probably what you are normally accustomed to. And I think that that's what's so interesting about PTA, is just his ability to go and zig and zag and go through it and not have the same thing almost happen twice, but then also evolve over time and have rules within himself. But then also he's just a fascinating figure. That's just what he is. He's somebody that now we think you in this era he's manic and he's wild and he's this mouthpiece on the scene, right? You know what I mean? And now, I mean, if you can get an interview with him, he might say 5 words with you. You know what I mean? He's, unless you say the wrong thing. If you say the right thing, he might talk your ear off about certain movies or certain different things. But, he's very, you've got to navigate through him now, as he was sort of navigating back then. So that's why I find him fascinating. I find him to be one of the people that would probably say that nowadays you couldn't do exactly what he did, and do it in such a way, and also be lucky enough to have champions and make movies that maybe didn't make all the money in the world, but had the pulse, right? Because that's what Boogie Nights and Magnolia has, is they have the pulse of the conversation in movie years that have really, really great movies. Like to have a movie in 99 like Magnolia come out and be one of the 5 films that I think everybody still talks about to this day, 5 or 10 films, that's still pretty damn impressive for somebody. That's at least in my opinion. But Jay, anything else about Hard Eight?
We didn't really talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman's scene, which is just like a bolt of lightning in this movie. This is the same year as Twister, I think. So this is kind of when he starts hitting it really big.
Mm-hmm.
But he just comes into this movie, and it feels like an alien coming into this very again stoic kind of film, and you have there are a few scenes in this movie where you kind of feel that discordant Paul Thomas Anderson musical tendency that doesn't totally fit into the scene, but it disorients you and puts you in a place where you feel, or where he kind of fully manipulates you into feeling how he wants you to feel in that moment. And this is wholly that. It is a scene where it's not the musical choice that you would think to make in that moment, especially when you have this guy who's just staring down Philip Baker Hall, and they're these great kind of reverse shots where they're framed almost identically, as if to say, hey, Philip Baker Hall, this is basically you as well. So you're less crass, you're less boisterous than this person, but you have every bit of this DNA inside of you. And so I think that's a really stellar sequence, mostly just because, Philip Seymour Hoffman is just, when you tell him to take it to 100, he takes it to 125, and he does it better than everyone else. He's just fantastic in that scene. It's a much shorter scene than I remembered it being, actually. But it's absolutely dynamite.
Yeah.
No, and something I love about it is that it's a very enigmatic scene. The function that it plays in the plot is not apparent. You really have to do a little interpretive work to be like, why is this even given the narrative real estate that it is? And I have my interpretation, and it may be different than yours.
Well, what do you find its purpose in the greater theme of the film to be?
Well, I think it shows that Sidney can actually have his cool rocked, particularly by this younger generation. He is trying to mold John in his own image, and John's contrasting influence is this very crass younger man. And so in some way, the Philip Seymour Hoffman character mirrors Jimmy, where he's this younger guy who is sort of a peacock and is mocking Sidney, and he is able to draw Sidney out into a bad bet. He should not make that hard 8 bet, but he does it, in my opinion. This is completely subjective. I think he's goaded into trying to prove something, and this is an indication that all is not as calm below the surface as he would like us to believe.
Reinforced by Samuel L. Jackson bringing it up earlier in the movie, where he's like, "Man, you used to be making these big ball bets, and now you're playing Keno."
Yeah.
So it is. I mean, there's so much mirroring between kind of every male character and Sidney in the movie. So I love that.
I love it too. I think that the other big thing about this movie, talk about all the actors that he starts working with. This is then the start of the great collaborations with him and the great cinematographer Robert Elswit, and just the style and the aesthetic that they have carry on for the majority of Paul Thomas Anderson's career.
I believe the editor Dylan Titchener, his longtime editor, worked on this one. Has not worked on all of his movies, but is one of the 2 editors that he's worked with consistently, and cannot be overpraised, I think, in the BTA effect on the movies he worked on.
I think this is actually, was it edited by Barbara Tulliver?
Was it? Was it not? Was this not a Titchener? Boy.
No, I don't think so. No, I'm looking at it right now. I think that this,
okay.
Yeah. I think
scratch all of that and apply it to the Dylan Titchener movie.
Maybe somebody should read Ethan Warren's book, American Apocrypha.
Honestly,
all of these details.
It's been a while since I read my own book. It's been a while since I have been thinking about this stuff.
Do you read that by the fire during like the holidays and like read it for the kids right as they're opening their presents?
I certainly do not.
That sounds like hell on earth.
Well, you worked with him on Boogie Nights. Why? What is the matter with me? My brain is full of Bob Dylan, the subject of my next book.
Oh, is that out there in the world? Do we know all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I tweet about that every so often. Yeah.
We just talked about Todd Haynes.
We just talked about Todd Haynes a couple of months ago and talked about I'm Not There, which I think is a masterpiece. And so
I cannot wait to write about that movie. That's coming up in my book.
Can I ask you something then real quick? This is tangent and this is what we do. Are you nervous about the Mangold film like we are for that?
Timmy Chalamet, Bob
Timmy
Dylan?
Chalamet is Bob Dylan.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an exceptionally great movie.
Okay. I think as long as we got you on record for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thrilled about how it's going to tie my book together.
I mean,
but yeah, I mean, I didn't like. I almost said Walk Hard. I didn't like Walk the Line all that much.
Okay. Well, I mean, essentially, that's Walk Hard.
I know. And I suspect this will be pretty similar, pretty by the books biopic. I think some of the casting is pretty crazy. I think Benedict Cumberbatch as Pete Seeger is
that's fucking nuts.
It's sort of Galaxy Brain a little bit, where it's like, you're taking me through the Vince McMahon meme as you make me think about the implications there. But I don't know. I think it's probably going to be pretty dull. And
isn't Bale in it? Is Bale in it?
Christian?
Yeah, isn't Christian Bale in it? Doesn't he?
If so, I have not seen that announcement. That's very intriguing.
I think you might be thinking of I'm Not There. But
am I thinking? No, because I thought. Well, maybe I was thinking Cumberbatch in that role. I thought there was somebody else.
I also don't know what that movie is even about. How much are they covering? There's a lot of questions. And I called Mangold's people at one point and to try and see if I could get a screenplay. And I did not get a call back. But you know what? who did send me a screenplay.
Who?
I called Todd Haynes's people
Mm.
and said, "Hey, you have no reason to say yes to this, but I'm writing a book on Bob Dylan, and like, could I just see the screenplay to I'm Not There?" And within like a couple of days, it was in my inbox. So Todd Haynes, a mensch.
I'm
Absolute
just
G.
well. I guess I should do that as well because I'm like that's my favorite Todd Haynes film.
How does that screenplay read?
Yeah,
I haven't dug into it yet. I'm sort of saving it. It's just going to be so exciting when I finally crack into it.
I'm firmly a Timothée Chalamet skeptic, so not my most anticipated.
I'm gonna fly up there and read it with you, Ethan. I'm gonna read it with you.
Sounds good. I'll read it to you.
Thank you. By the chimney with care. No, I mean it's shakes up the folk music scene when he plugs in an electric guitar in the New York, the Newport Folk Film Festival. This just sounds.
We know.
Yeah. I mean, the only interesting thing is that it's Jay Cox writing it with Mangold. Is Jay Cox's.
What has he written?
Well, I mean,
Dewey Cox's brother from.
No, I mean Jay Cox is the longtime collaborator and screenwriter with Scorsese. Who did like that did like Age of Innocence and I mean not Gangs of New York obviously, but then he did Silence with him too. So that's the only bright spot. But then he's also done like movies like Gangs of New York or De Lovely. So yeah, it's a hit or miss. Maybe it just depends on the filmmaker, and having Scorsese there helps, for sure. But I mean, looking at it like Boyd Holbrook as Johnny Cash, that's an interesting cast.
What?
Yeah.
What?
That's what's on IMDb.
We can't get into this.
Bringing him back from Indiana Jones.
He's bringing him back. And
confession, I kind of like the new Indiana Jones.
Confession, I didn't watch it.
Did you like it? Really? You liked it?
I'm a sucker for indie, I gotta say. I had a good time with it.
So wait, you would rank Kingdom of the Crystal Skull over this one? Or under this one?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's just can't. No.
I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Can't get into it now.
Not saying that like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull isn't that great, but Jesus, I mean this new one. Ethan, don't watch the new Indiana Jones movie. It's bad.
I won't. Who is Monica Barbaro and why is she playing Joan Baez? She's so pretty. Oh, from Top Gun Maverick, apparently. She's a lot prettier than Joan Baez. No offense to Joan Baez.
She's Phoenix in Top Gun Maverick. She's the female pilot, I guess.
I hope everyone is enjoying us just riffing on Bob Dylan stuff for a while at the end.
This is exactly what we do on this show. But no,
did you guys see May December yet? Speaking of Todd Haynes,
I have seen.
I didn't know this was.
I have seen May December. Did you not like it, Ethan?
I am going to spontaneously combust if I don't see that movie in the next week.
Oh, okay. If I told you I've seen it,
I'm gonna fully die.
If I told you I've seen it twice, would that make you even angrier than me?
I'm so happy for you. It's great that there's joy in the world.
It's
if
wonderful.
I don't see it soon, I'm going to die because I binged the whole filmography going into studying I'm Not There, and like just the way it all weaves together. He's so fascinating.
It's crazy how a movie like Safe ties into Dark Waters, and you wouldn't think about it.
Where you at on Wonderstruck?
Oh, not interested. That's my real life point. Oh no, thank you.
Yeah, that's a pass. That's a pass for me as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's that bad. But I get it. I get it at least. Is I'm Not There your favorite, Haynes?
Probably just because I am such a Dylan dork, but I do think it's so fascinating. I think it's like I'm a Dylan dork and a Godard dork, and so like that's the perfect movie for somebody like me. He's made a lot of great movies. No, it's not my favorite movie. No.
Far From Heaven?
No. Velvet Goldmine.
Interesting.
Is just I could watch that movie every
lower
week.
tier for
for both of us. We're a little bit lower on that one, but that's okay. Hey, everybody's different. If we were all like the same things, like Jay says, that would be a dull place. You know what I mean?
Sure would.
It would. Speaking of which, Jay.
Yes, sir.
Before we get out of here, we're going to test your award season knowledge based off the film we just reviewed, which was Heart 8.
This was nominated for nothing.
in a segment we like to call It's an Honor to Get Nominated. That is correct, Jay. It was nominated for nothing. However, it was nominated over at that year for the Indie Spirit Awards. Do you want to tell me what Indie Spirit Awards it was nominated for?
I got to admit, I was not following the Indie Spirit Awards in '97.
Well, that's a damn shame. I'm sure Ethan knows all
I
about
don't know.
the
Was
Indie
it like
Spirit Awards.
best director, best
So he got nominated for Best First
actor?
Feature and Best First Screenplay. And then Elswick got nominated for Cinematography. And Philip Baker Hall got nominated for Male Actor, Best Male Actor.
Kitchener got nominated for should have edited this movie, so Ethan would have been right earlier.
That's correct.
It's a really prescient award, and I'm really glad they gave it to him.
Really honorary. That was real ahead of their time kind of award. Good for you, Ethan.
Hold on, I gotta go put I gotta edit my 2-star review to a 1-star review.
And then Sam Jackson got nominated for Best Supporting Male Performance in this movie as well. And
wait, so Sam Jackson out of the 4 is the only one? Or
no,
did you say Baker Hall did too?
Baker Hall got in. Yeah,
good. Okay.
They just were like, no, thank you, Gwyneth, and no, thank you, Johnson.
Philip Baker Hall really is like stellar in this movie.
He lost to I believe Robert Duvall for The Apostle.
Huh.
Yeah.
A movie that was enough of a phenomenon that it was 11 when this movie comes out, and I was aware of The Apostle. Crossed my eye line.
It also won Best Film, Best Feature at the Indie Spirits that year.
Really?
Over like Waiting for Guffman and Ulysses Gold.
Oh, wouldn't that have been a cool win?
Loved, a movie called Loved, Chasing Amy. Those were the other films. Yeah, it was a rough year. It was not great. But then he lost Best First Feature to Eve's Bayou. That's what he lost there. Yeah, Cassie Lemons' film, which is a fantastic movie. I really love that movie. He lost First Screenplay to In the Company of Men. That's what he lost. So
wait, is that the Neil LaBute movie?
Mm-hmm.
That was his first screenplay. That was his first odious film.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is why we do this. So then you can kind of look back and go, "What the hell was going on that year?" You know?
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, Jay, Ethan, would you nominate this for any Oscars that year? Would you put it up there? The thing
is, this is the same qualifying year as Boogie Nights, so
yeah. So probably not.
Probably not. No.
I mean, Philip Baker Hall is really great in that.
Would you nominate Philip Baker Hall for this or for his cameo performance in Boogie Nights? Which is,
I mean, he's made more of a cultural impact in Boogie Nights for sure. But,
that's true.
I don't know. I mean, I think this movie has a lot of. When I was thinking about this movie, I was kind of thinking. I mentioned Soderbergh earlier. I was kind of like, I mean, the better version of this movie is the limey, sort of about the cost of violence. I mean, I don't know. This is not the cost of violence story is certainly not the most original idea that has been put on film ever, but that is sort of a contemporaneous example of it. I mean, he's really good. I'm sure I could find somebody in the list that I think Philip Baker Hall is better than that was nominated this year.
Yeah, I suspect and if this had the right distributor and the right push behind it, you probably could have gotten him sort of a good on ya career award.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it feels like what would happen nowadays, right? Where you have the because like Duvall's nominated for The Apostle. This is also Matt Damon, Good Will Hunting, Peter Fonda for Ulysses Gold, Dustin Hoffman for Wag the Dog, and then Nicholson wins for As Good as It Gets. So
does Dustin Hoffman need that nomination?
Probably not.
Or you gotta wag that dog.
Do you have to?
I don't know if Damon needs it for Good Will Hunting. I wouldn't.
I'm looking at the Oscar nominations here. I just looked at Titanic Best Picture and produced by James Cameron and John Landau. For a second, I thought it said John Landis, and I was like, John Landis produced Titanic? That's crazy, and nobody died. That's crazy.
Jesus. No, but it's kind of hard to, because like you guys mentioned, there's Boogie Nights here that put a bunch of it, and I'm sure that when we talk about that episode, we're gonna have a bunch of people that weren't nominated that we would have thrown in there as well. But yeah, Philip Baker Hall feels like a guy nowadays, the type of performance that like all the regional critics film festivals, they like, they or critics groups or film festivals, they like come and honor and they give him like the lifetime achievement award, and then like potential like the Bill Nye, right? Like that happened like last year or the year before or whatever, where they're like, oh well, he's we should give him one as like a career performance or whatever, but we're not going to give him the actual award. We're just going to have him show up and sit through 3 hours of Jimmy Kimmel's monologues. So but anywho,
I love the Oscars.
Ethan,
Hello.
thank you so
That's
much.
me.
Thank you so much for coming on and doing this show with us. This wild first episode of our PTA series. Can you tell everybody out there where they can find you and all your work? And yeah, and also, could you tell us what your favorite PTA film is before we get?
Well, let's just bring it full circle. My favorite PTA film is Punch Drunk Love. It's one of my four. It's one of my 4 faves on Letterboxd.
Well, there you go.
I think that movie is just so special, and every time I come back to it, I discover new things about it. It's a remake of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's a perfect movie.
Man, that's so crazy to be able to come full circle. What can I ask you real quick? What was like the turning point for you to go back to it and then finally be like, no, I was wrong? Because like that's the beauty too about like movies that we see young and then we come back with our knowledge and embrace it. Like, what about it at first? I mean, you told us that why you hated it and you thought it was so pretentious, but then you came back around. What turned you around on it?
I think it grew on me a little bit. It
was it curiosity? Were you curious to come back to it as well too?
After a certain point, I just had to come back to it because I was like, well, now I fully love this director, but there is still this one movie that I think I don't like. And then I popped it back in, and everything that had been so upsetting to me clicked. And like, I got it. These are very intentional effects. Obviously, he's a director with a huge amount of command of his craft. And I got on his wavelength and then sort of became addicted to it and still kind of am. Just the rhythms of that movie are so fascinating, and just to sink into its dissonant world is something I will do as many times as I can.
I love it.
Just to throw out some kind of, I'll read Ethan's book to him here. And this is, I think, the very first thing he said. He said, after he saw Punch Drunk Love, I exited dazed and distressed into another phase that has carried me across a full 2 decades as I have wrestled with the seemingly simple but persistently puzzling question, what does this Paul Thomas Anderson guy think he's doing? So that's kind of the genesis of this whole thing.
Yep.
And now Ethan has solved the case.
Figured it out. So where can you find me? I have a website, ethanrawarren.com, which is sort of the best place to catch up with. I'm opening it up myself right now because I don't know the last time I updated it, but I do a lot of stuff. I've written plays. I made a movie. You can find all that stuff on there. More recently, I've been doing some podcast collaboration with One Heat Minute and Blake Howard over there. We're working on a mini series right now called The Great Henson Caper, all about the life and times of Jim Henson.
Oh, wow.
We're about halfway through that mini series. And I have a Substack, betweenartandlife.substack.com, which is kind of where I am most consistently pumping stuff out these days while I am working on my Bob Dylan book. So if you want to see some content from me, because we all need more content in our lives, not enough content, betweenartandlife.substack.com is a place where I have fun.
Please go follow content. Please go follow all Ethan's stuff, and Ethan will have to get you back on in a future series.
And, Ethan_Warren_ on Twitter if you want to still be on Twitter, or X if we must call it that. But if you don't follow me there, I respect that because it's a bad app where bad things happen.
Yeah. We, behind the scenes, just real quick, is that I was lucky to get Ethan and you on the show because for a hot minute there, you deleted Twitter and then you came back and then
I came back because I couldn't stop DMing people. You can't DM on Blue Sky. It's a huge problem.
It's kind of like where are we going? So luckily we got you on here. We're going to die to get you on here again down the road. We've got some heavy hitters next year that we'd love to have you on for. And
anytime, please.
You don't have to write a book about it in order to get back on the show. Just going to point that out there. But if you want to write a book about them, I mean, you're more than
From
welcome
Paul
to.
Thomas Anderson to Paul W.S. Anderson.
No, Jay, I don't think we're actually doing that series. That was not. We'll talk about it offline. Jay, can you tell everybody out there where they can find you and all your work, sir?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at.
Wait, Jay.
Did I skip?
Yeah, you skipped. So let's
The
do it
worst
one more
possible timing.
Yeah, one more. Hang on, let me just lead you back in.
Okay.
Jay, where can we find you and all your work on the internet?
Oh, let's just start with Letterboxd. You can find me on Letterboxd. Just search Jay Ledbetter. You can find me on Twitter, where I am less and less present by the day, at Mr. J Ledbetter. And you can find any of my work over at AwardsWatch, written or spoken or otherwise.
You can find me.
And Ethan, thank you so much for coming on. This is I really do. Your book has been awesome, and
Thank you so
we're
much.
lucky to have you on. So I appreciate it.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd at Ryan McQuade 77. You can find all my work here over at awardswatch.com. We also have another podcast that we do at the same every week as well, which is the Awards Watch Main Show podcast. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify, and while you're over there, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. We'd love all the 5 stars. Don't give us 2 stars like this jerk who gave Ethan's book 2 stars. Thanks a lot.
Should
Jay.
I not
I
have
apologize.
started promoting my book on a podcast by reading a 2-star review?
I think you did,
Was that
but
strategically not a good idea?
I think that was the best idea. I think it gets people in there. You set low expectations, and then it blows out of the water, and then it's a great stocking stuffer for everyone. And everyone should go buy this book. It's an incredible piece of work that I've been enjoying reading as well, Ethan. And if you're a big fan of PTA, you got to read it. It's a must read. And
I'll just butt in here. 3-star review for the podcast. All right.
Oh no, that's not good.
It's not 2. It's 3. Good content, bad hosts.
Okay. Well, I don't want you to
Wait, that doesn't make any sense.
I don't want you to read anymore. We said we were only reading 5 stars.
That's the title. I'm not gonna go any.
It gets
further,
a little
but
personal. I think some of those older reviews.
That's the executive summary.
There you
Good
go.
content, bad hosts.
Well, can't change that.
Try to pretzel your mind into that being a thing.
Can't. Yeah, it's the logic of
That's
the
a
internet.
logic puzzle.
Yeah, it's the logic of the internet, folks. I don't know what to tell you. Next week, we'll be continuing our PTA movie series. We'll be talking about a little movie called Boogie Nights. So thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you all next time.